All right, well, thank you very much. Glad to have everybody here. I thought we might get a good crowd if the weather turned nice. It was a little iffy when I was looking at it last night. We had sunny skies and thunderstorms this afternoon. But the weather's great, it's a beautiful day, and the garden is looking fantastic. I keep getting asked about where we are since it's been such a mild winter. I think we're about 10 days ahead of schedule right now. See, earlier we were a couple of weeks, but it's starting to even out a little bit. Those cold days kind of slowed things down. But we're still, you look at where flowers are, where plants are leafing out, we're about 10 days ahead of schedule. So just to throw that out there. Makes it great for the tour ahead. I was kind of spoiled for choice here. For the most part, this, as tempting as it was as I was walking around looking at plants to talk about, I skipped bulbs. We've got one on there, but for the most part, we've skipped all the bulbs, so we'll go by a lot of early spring bulbs, but you know, I've talked about them before, and we'll talk about them again, I'm sure. So I wanted to do something different this time, and just get the typical herbaceous perennial plants. For those of you who have not been part of the tours before, we try to do it pretty informally. I'd love to hear people's comments about the plants. I'd love to hear if you've had experience with it that are different from mine. I may, sometimes I say something kind of disparaging about the plant and people will correct me. Sometimes I, wax poetic about how wonderful a plant is, and sometimes people correct me on that side too. So I'd love to hear it because we all have different gardens, and it's great to get the different viewpoints that people have. This is a big group to do a tour, so I will talk loud. Everybody will probably not be able to see the plant while I'm talking about it. It's a little easier when I'm pointing up at a big tree, but since they're little plants, you won't be able to see it. All of them, except for maybe one plant, has a label on it, and that plant everybody should be able to see because we can spread out there. All of the plants on the list there's one plant that will have an incorrect label on there because oh no, I didn't change it on here, so it'll have the wrong name on here, so the label will match up. But after we finish talking, as you go by the plant, you can look at it, you can check it out. When I can, I'll pick off a piece and hold it up. I do ask you to try to stay on the paths. There's lots of stuff under the ground that is coming up. If you can step on it now, and now is real critical time. I do ask that you always try and stay on the paths because we work very hard to get nice, loose, fluffy soil. And in some areas of the garden, we do have that. And so we get lots of people standing on it. It does compact the soil a lot. I used to have some figures on that. There was a graduate student who did some research on soil compaction, and she had kids walking back and forth on a path, school kids, and compared that with tractors driving back and forth over it. The kids are much worse than tractors. They don't have big air in their tires, so it does make a difference. And keep that in mind in your own gardens. You have to get into your gardens to work, but if you try and stick to paths and try not to walk all over things, it will make a difference, especially if you're adding lots of organic matter and fluffing up your soil. So we will do our best to make sure everybody gets a chance to see the plants. Please ask questions. I love questions. Those of you who haven't been here may not understand, but I like talking about plants, and I will gladly spend 2 hours talking about plants. And if I do that, you can get in front of the camera because Chris won't be able to record anymore because the battery will be dead. You always have something that you wish you had. I was just out in California, and I was looking at all these wonderful plants they can grow that we can't grow up in the San Francisco area. They can grow all these South African proteas and all kinds of crazy stuff, and cloud forest species, and just all kinds of stuff that we can't grow, and I was drooling over them all. But then I was talking with a friend of mine who's in Minnesota, and he said something about, he saw the tour online, and was early perennials. He thought that was funny because in Minnesota, early perennials are like June. That's when they come out. But then I go to places like Minnesota in the summer, and everything is flowering at the same time. Whereas here it's all kind of stretches out, so you don't have quite that same exuberance. So there's something for everywhere you grow. And right here, one of the wonderful things is we have color all year long. And right now, it's really, you know, the shrubs are starting to flower, trees are starting to flower, and the perennials are definitely either flowering or just foliage-wise looking really good in a lot of cases. So we're going to jump right in and start talking about some perennials that look great right now, that work well in your gardens. I tried to put all plants that do grow well here. So we're going to head around this way, and like I said, we'll try and make sure everybody gets a chance to see the plants we're talking about. First plant is a Heuchera, and it's this Heuchera right here. This one called Southern Comfort, and it was bred with a lot of Heuchera villosa in its bloodline. Heuchera villosa is one of the few Heucheras that really does well for us in the southeast. Now they put out a new Heuchera about once every 3 days. I think there's a new Heuchera that comes out, and they're all beautiful. They all have, you know, chartreuse foliage and purple foliage and speckled foliage and all kinds of wonderful things, and ruffled edges, and you know, a lot of plants, a lot of things that look wonderful. This kind of a swath from these little shrubs all the way up front was a whole big planting of a bunch of different Heuchera. I was calling it, when we planted it, a stained glass planting, because there's all these colors and textures, and it was beautiful. You can see what's left. There's a couple struggling back here, and there's Southern Comfort still alive. Gives you a clue about what which ones are better than others. Southern Comfort's a real neat one. The new foliage comes up, and it's kind of this peachy color when it first emerges, and we've got some that are starting to emerge, but we've had some cooler weather. When you get some cooler, as it goes through the summer, it kind of goes a little more orangey, and then you get some purpley tones during the winter, kind of always changing as the foliage ages. It has spikes of kind of creamy white flowers. It's not the showiest flowering plant. Some of the other Heucheras have nice pink spikes of flowers, a little bit better, but you know, there's a trade-off. You get a lot of that villosa blood in there, and it doesn't always do well. Interestingly, the Heuchera villosa has kind of a fuzzy leaf, and you can see that on these Heucheras. There's a little bit more of the fuzz on the leaf, which you would think wouldn't be great here in our high humidity. That's more typically a characteristic of plants from dryland habitats, but it does do very well here. Southern Comfort is fairly sun tolerant. The Heucheras tend to like a little bit more shade, but Southern Comfort seems to be very good in sun. It seems to be pretty tolerant of most soils. You can see here we're under a big live oak. We got lots of reflective surfaces, lots of sun. Gets a little bit of afternoon shade in the summertime, but it's taken a pretty tough spot without a whole lot of supplemental water or anything, and doing very well. A couple things Heucheras don't like in general. Heucheras don't like leaves laying on top of them. If you have maples, that kind of leaf especially, you know how maple leaves their leaves will mat together when they're damp and they're falling in the fall. They hate that. They will die quickly with that. Oaks aren't quite as bad because they tend to stay kind of crispy. They don't mat together too bad. But you do need to be careful if you have Heucheras, any type, to keep the leaves off them in the fall. They're one of those perennials that just does not like it. Heucheras will also, assuming that they live for multiple years, which a lot of those wonderful plant ones won't, but ones like Southern Comfort will, you start to get kind of a stem on it. And the plant will kind of be laying on the ground with this stem going down the root. There's two things you can do then. You can either cut that stem off the ground and replant that whole stem back in the ground. Treat it like you would a new plant, water it and whatever, so you got that crown resting right on the ground. Or you can just bury the whole thing, kind of dig a hole underneath it, lay it down, and bury it. But if you don't do that, they'll tend to kind of to go downhill. But if you do that, that kind of keeps rejuvenating them. They'll put out new roots from that stem and keep going a lot longer. Okay, this plant over here, you see there's a few of them scattered out. It's the chartreuse leaf plant. That's a Heucherella. A Heucherella is a cross between Heuchera and Heucherella. The Heucherellas, in my experience, do a little bit better for us than the Heucheras in general terms. Some are real dogs and don't last for very long, kind of sputter out, but many of them are quite a bit better. This Solar Power is one that I've gotten really fond of. It's a real bright plant, and I like that bright color. It's seems to do well. It's relatively vigorous. You can see some other ones that were planted at the same time. Midnight Bayou is doing okay, but the solar power is doing better than the others. It comes out with a real bright gold leaf, kind of fades to a little bit more chartreuse as the season goes on, but heavily splotched with red. During the summer, when it's hot and you get a lot of growth coming out, you get more of that chartreusey yellow, and with some real striking red splashes on there. As it gets cooler, you get more of the red on there, so it takes on more of those red tones in the cooler temperatures. In more shade, and these are plants that will tolerate a lot of shade. Actually, you tend to prefer more shade. In the shade, there'll be more chartreuse than gold. You really don't get that real vibrant gold, but still a really nice color that brightens up the shade, and still that red flecking through the centers of the leaves. Again, kind of nice creamy white flowers above there. You can see this is getting ready to flower, so it's pretty early flower one. Typically, the Heucherellas will flower earlier than the Heucheras, often by a month or more, sometimes by a couple months. But a real easy, nice plant. Treat it otherwise much like a Heuchera with the same kind of general care that I talked about today. Questions? Do I need to repeat all that?
Nope.
Nope. The electric lime is looking like a really nice one, this Heuchera electric lime. This is another one that's got some villosa in it, not as much as Southern Comfort. We've not been growing this long enough. Don't have other experience with it, so I like to give them a few years because often the first couple years they'll be great, and then they kind of go downhill. Unfortunately, a lot of people have had bad experiences with Heucheras. I was talking to some retail garden centers, and they were saying, 5 years ago they were selling all kinds of Heucheras, and now they really kind of pared it down to the ones that have performed best, because a lot of people have taken them home and they've lost them in the first year or two, and no garden center likes that. So we're still trialing them. This is a really nice one. I like how it comes out real bright chartreuse yellow, and the older foliage, instead of just going green, it goes green but with some silver overlay to it. And you can see that it's more of a kind of a silvery, I guess, leaf with dark veins on it as it ages, which is really nice. We'll see how it does.
There's a question.
Thank you.
About how heavily do you need to fertilize them, especially if you've got them in quite sandy soil?
Well, we don't really fertilize much at all with mineral fertilizers. We mulch with leaves, which enriches the soil. I always tell people to add organic matter to your soil. If you have sandy soils, add organic matter. If you have clay soils, add organic matter. You can never add well, I suppose you could add too much organic matter, but you'd be hard pressed to do it. They grow in woodland soil, so they're used to that relatively fluffy organic soils, but they also grow in a lot of times on rock faces where there's some moisture coming through there, but not a lot of real deep soils. They're not really heavy feeders, especially here in the southeast. You can push them a little too hard here. If they're in too rich a soil, they'll grow a little too fast and tend to peter out a little bit quicker. So I wouldn't use supplemental fertilizer for the most part on these. If you live in the area, even on most fairly sandy soils, we often have, if there's some clay mixed in there. Clay is wonderful stuff. It is just jam-packed full of nutrients. It's great stuff. Just too much of it can be a little bit difficult to work with. But nutrient-wise, it's great. But I'd say add some organic matter, and that should do it for it. Okay, next plant on the list is a little guy, so you might have to see it as you walk by. It's a little grass-like plant, Carysibernia, the bristly leaf sedge. And I'm a big fan of carex. There are all kinds of ones out there. There are big ones, little ones, variegated ones, plain green ones. This is just a neat little plant, I think. It's great for using at the front of a border in a shady spot, or in a sunny spot for that matter. It's great for adding some different textures to the garden. It's extremely wide distribution in the North America. It grows basically all along the East Coast, except for Florida, and it seems to skip, I think, Georgia or Alabama, one of those southeastern states, but I never can remember. But it goes all the way up into Canada, and then goes all the way across into the Midwest, and across all the way west, all through Canada, basically every bit of Canada. It will grow in like the tundra. This thing is, from the southern U.S. up to the tundra. Pretty tough plant. Grows in sun to shade. Just makes a nice little kind of 6 to 8 inch ball of nice tidy green foliage. I just think it's a cute little thing. It's one of those plants you can stick in a pot, and that looks like a face, have a little hair coming out or whatever. But it is a neat plant. Takes just about any conditions at all. You don't see it a lot in the trade, but sometimes you can find it. It is sold out there. I've seen it for sale fairly often. Sometimes you can get plugs of it, and I have seen it used really effectively where somebody planted out a bunch of plugs of it and made almost like a turf out of this little dwarf grass, which was awfully nice.
Deer resistant?
Deer resistant. I wouldn't swear to it, but I believe that I read that it is very deer resistant. But don't hold me to that, because the deer won't. But yeah, I believe it is deer resistant. Mostly I'm not very good at knowing what is and what is not deer resistant. But I believe this one is. Okay, next plant, Fritillaria verticillata. This is one of the easiest of the fritillarias to grow in the garden. If you ever get seduced by the bulb catalogs to buy Fritillaria meleagris and some of these other ones, they can be a little bit miffy, as the English like to say. Some are easy, some can be rather difficult plants to grow in the garden in the southeast. And for us, this is certainly one of the best. It makes a little plant. It can grow up to about 30 inches or so tall, but what's interesting about it is it has a hard time doing that by itself. And in the wild, it grows up through other plants and on the edges of shrubs and things. And you can see the tips of the leaves will curl around almost tendril-like and grab onto other plants to help it stay upright and get in the sun. But you can see where it's lower, it doesn't do that until it starts to get a little bit taller and start flowering. Flowers this time of year, maybe a little bit early now. It has kind of these off-white flowers, bell-shaped flowers. This is one that's not opened up all the way, but they're really nice if you look at them up close, because up close they're kind of spotted with almost a checkerboard pattern on the inside. And if you've seen some of the other fritillarias like meleagris, they have that real distinctive kind of checkerboard pattern in there. We could pass that around if people would like to look at it. Technically, this is I'm not sure, some sort of underground structure, maybe a corm, I guess, for a fritillary. And it's so it is one that you can buy dormant from bulb companies, plant, and it will come up, and you can divide it and get more bulbs and spread them around pretty easily. Grows in full sun to part shade. Like I said, naturally it grows kind of under shrubs, and it will kind of crawl up so it gets more light. It does not seed around much, although it will sometimes form seed pods, which can be a kind of attractive on it, but I've never seen one actually seeding around in the garden. Although I have heard that it can seed a bit in the garden, which would be kind of nice. I'd like it to do that. Takes most any soil. Like I said, it's really one of the easiest of the fritillaries to grow.
Do they last all summer?
The flowers?
Well, and the plant?
The plant? Yeah, the plant will stay up for most of the summer. It just flowers this time of year, but you do have foliage most of the summer on it. It gets real hot, it can go dormant a little bit earlier, which it often does here. Okay, our next plant is Euphorbia. There are a lot of wonderful spurges, Euphorbias, that will grow for us here that make these wonderful garden plants, nice kind of plants with a lot of presence to them. They really stand out as a herbaceous perennial, but they are evergreen. And many of them are are nice, almost shrubby-like plants. This one, Euphorbia, I have it on your list as red wing because that's about the only way you can find it in the U.S. is as red wing. But it's actually the person who discovered it, bred it, and introduced it, gave the name Euphorbia charam, C-H-A-R-A-M. So that's how you would actually, that would be its actual name, and, but hard to find it that way. This is a hybrid between Euphorbia amygdaloides, which is Mrs. Rob's bonnet, it's sometimes called, which is a stoloniferous species that makes a really nice ground cover. It's one of the easiest plants to grow, just spreads and grows wonderfully for us. And another hybrid, Euphorbia cross martinii. This was from that cross. Has these really nice kind of almost blue, gray-green lanceolate leaves that clothe the stems. This is about as tall as it generally gets, about 24 inches. It can get a little bit taller, but it stays nice and compact. Some of the these shrubby type euphorbias will get kind of leggy and open, but this generally does not. When the flower buds are coming out, they're tinged with red, and you see that a little bit. This is an odd year. It has less red than it normally does this year. I'm sure that's a temperature-related thing. Typically, you get much more of this kind of reddish coloring on there when it emerges, when the flower spikes start to emerge and elongate. And the stems, if you look back, you can see some of the stems. Like down here, you have more reddish on the red on the stems, but we're getting a lot less red color on this year. But then the flowers open up, and they're the bracts. The flowers are inside. The bracts are bright chartreuse yellow, really showy, and it will just absolutely cover the plant in flowers. And the flowers, since what's showy is not an actual flower, they'll last for quite a long time through the season. Typically, the way you care for a euphorbia like this is after the flowers fade, after they no longer look very good, you cut back those stems that have flowers on there and let the other flowers. Usually you won't have just solid flowers on every stem. This one, you tend to have flowers on every single stem. So what I've done is I kind of do a little bit of selective pruning typically. I'll take this out so some of this stuff in the interior can grow up through, but I won't cut out every flower stalk right away because then you get kind of a sad looking plant. But I do, by the end of the season, you get it all cut out and you have plenty of other growth that comes up and takes over for the next season. They want full sun, well-drained soils.
They could be propagated by cutting?
They can be propagated by cuttings difficultly. A lot of these are not easy to propagate by cuttings. They have a milky sap in there, which kind of clogs up the vascular system. They don't take water up very well. You can do it, but like I said, it can be very difficult. And I should mention that when you're messing with these plants, you're cutting them, doing things like that, you gotta be careful of that sap. It's a real irritant. Some people react very badly to it. I had an employee who got some in her eye, and she had a patch over her eye for about 2 weeks. I mean, it was pretty serious. But some people, if just a drop gets on them, it like burns them, and it's pretty painful. So do be careful with these. Doesn't affect me too bad, but a lot of people do.
How do they reproduce them? By seeds?
Well, no, because this is a clone. You don't get it from seed. You get from you divide the clump. Yeah. And you can do them by cuttings, but they tend to be kind of difficult, a lot of them. If you get some of the younger material, sometimes it's easier. But you can kind of divide that woody base and you can get plants that way.
Mark, how long do these live? Are they short-lived?
How long do they live? That's a great question. If they're real happy, if you get them in a well-drained spot, sunny spot, you do care for them, you cut back the old stalks, things like that, they can be fairly long-lived perennials, usually 6 to 8 years. Often though, if they're in a soil that's really too rich for them or not well enough drained, which is often the case with our soils around here, they'll peter out after 2, 3, 4 years. So they do really need that very good drainage. They do tend to kind of come and go in the garden. They're not often not real long lasting. But that's okay because there's always new ones being bred. Okay, our next plant is going to be this little herbaceous guy right in front of me. Okay, those of y'all over here, please watch your step because we are kind of in a construction zone here. You can see we're putting in some new paths through our Plantsman's Wood, so they're a little more accessible back that way. We're very, very excited about. Okay, next plant on the list is this little geum. It's called Eos. Anybody know who Eos is? What was that? Eos is the, I guess, Greek goddess of dawn. So there you go, the dawn. So this is the first, at least the first that I know of, gold-leafed geum. The geums are in the rose family, which people tend to think of shrubs and trees as plants in the rose family. Apples, peaches, roses, pyracantha. But if you think of strawberries, which are also in the rose family, this is very similar in appearance to a strawberry. Has kind of a rounded leaf, real quilted texture. This one gets deep orange flowers, beautiful orange flowers. Unfortunately, geums typically don't do very well for us. Don't ask me how long-lived this one is. If we lived somewhere with nice, real cold winters, it'd probably be fairly long-lived for us. Around here, we don't know. Some geums will do okay. Most kind of peter out relatively early in their lifetime. So this has just been planted. So we're going to be watching it to see what it does. But it is such a cool plant. I thought if it does die quickly, I won't have a chance to put it on a tour again. So I wanted to go ahead and get it. You have to come back later. We should get flowers out of it this year. It is large enough size. And geum flowers, if you haven't seen them before, are really the flowers are just deeply saturated with color. So they're really nice plants, nice flowers to look at. They're kind of on wiry stalks, but this one has orange, which should look great against that chartreuse. I don't know if it'll retain that really nice chartreuse gold color all the way through the summer, through the high heat. Supposedly it will. We will see. It's going to get, during the summer, it's going to get a fair amount of afternoon shade, so we'll also see if it gets crispy. That's part of what we do, is torture plants to see what they do, see how they'll grow. So I can tell you, when you ask me if it's long-lived or will it tolerate sun, I can say no, it dies quickly and it fries in full sun. That's what we're here for. Question about this plant, about other geums? All right. The big group has everybody intimidated. There's no questions.
Now, are they all particularly frail, or is there a certain type that's more hardy than others?
Geum, Mrs. Bradshaw is a form, has orangey red flowers. Tends to be one of the most heat tolerant of the geums. It's really they like that winter dormant period and a shorter summer, preferably not as hot as ours. Perhaps less humidity. I don't know. I've never really heard for sure whether it's the humidity that does them in, but it just seems to be the heat. When it gets hot, some of them just kind of melt a bit.
Mark, is this the only place in the shade that you planted it, or is it elsewhere throughout the garden?
I believe right now this is the only one that's in the ground, although I may not be correct about that. There may be a few more out that have just gone out. I mean, this is just in the ground. So I wouldn't swear to it. We have a few more plants, and we'll be tucking them in some other places to see how they do. We'll probably stick one or two in the lath house here, see how they do with a little bit more of a protected spot, a little more shade. Typically geums like a lot of sun, and so that's one of the tough things. These plants that don't like all our heat but like sun is trying to place them, get them in somewhere where they get some afternoon shade, they get a little bit of cooling in the hottest part of the day is generally the best, but where they get some direct sun at some point.
Is there a native geum around here?
I believe Geum arvensis is a native. It's not as showy, it's perhaps not the best garden.
Obviously would do better.
Right. And if Geum sold as well as Heucheras, then probably people would be doing a little bit more playing around and trying to get them to cross.
So where do these come from?
It's a European. This is a hybrid. I'm not sure what all is in its parentage. Perhaps it has some arvensia in it, and it'll take our heat. I don't know. The typical species, garden species, is Coccinea. There's typically what you see is Geum Coccinea, but there are some other species that they use in it. Other questions?
Not about Geum, but what you have on top of you that is flowering?
This is an Epimedium, and beautiful flowering vine. It is. They can be quite vigorous. Some people don't like them because they grow very fast. You have these two types of flowers on there. You have male and female flowers. So you can see you have some in the same stalk. You'll have male and female. The big ones are the female. The small ones are the male, and they'll form nice little fruits. It supposedly has a great fragrance, but I never can smell it. Sometimes it's called chocolate vine. It's supposed to smell like chocolate. I don't get it, but I don't have a very good sense of smell.
Can you spell the name of that?
Akebia. Akebia. Yeah, this is quinata. This particular one, if you come later in the summer, it's got kind of a silvery overlay to the leaf. I don't know if you can see it now. Not really. But it has kind of a silver overlay. But Akebia quinata, the five-leaf Akebia. There's also Akebia trifoliata. Trying to think. Yeah, we'll come through the white garden. If you look at the arbor when we go through the white garden, we have a white variegated one that's in flower now. That's with light color flowers. That's trifoliata, I believe. Although it often has five leaflets. We always try and confuse people. Other questions? Anybody growing geum at home? Anybody have experience with that?
I tried, it died.
Anybody from farther up north who was growing it up north? It's a pretty popular plant. You get in cooler areas. Yeah. Well, maybe this one will work. Come back in a year and see if it's still there, and if so, you can try growing it again.
What happens with the Japanese maple here, Julian?
The Japanese, for those of you who are familiar with the garden, who know this beautiful Japanese maple that was here, Julian, that we've been growing and pruning and caring for the last 20 plus years, we carefully and lovingly dug it up and moved it, and when you walk into look right in the center of the lath house, it's right there as you come in, right in front of you.
Great.
And when you look at it, it is much bigger when you have to move it. Did not look so big in the ground. The next plant on our list are some hybrids that have some North Carolina roots to them. It's an Asian primrose up here in front that's flowering that were bred by Dr. Clifford Parks, the former owner of Camellia Forest Nursery, whose son now runs David Parks. Cliff is known for his work with camellias and that kind of thing mostly, and a lot of other Asian woody plants. But if you go out and visit Dr. Parks at his house, he gets you out looking at his primroses that he's been breeding for ages. And what he was going for were primroses that were heat tolerant. And I don't know what all what all he used in his crosses to get these heat tolerant ones, but for the most part, the most of the blood is Primula vulgaris subspecies Cypthorpii, which is the common primrose but a more southern form, Euphorbia, kind of from a southern area in Japan and perhaps over into China, I'm not sure. A lot of different colors in the group. In the wild, Primula vulgaris Euphorbia is mostly kind of a lavendery color, but with all the other primroses that are out there that have been bred, he's brought a lot of other colors in there, so we can get those great primroses that people grow in cooler spots like England and the Northwest. This was a planting of red shades of that plant. We kind of separated them out. They really want moisture, and this is not as moist a spot as they need. They almost want a boggy soil to really grow well and perform. Where they do well, a little bit of shade, really nice damp soils, they do great for us here. And you can go out to Camellia Forest and get them. They sell them out there, and you can pick your colors. And Dr. Parks is still working on them, getting different colors in there, white edges with red centers, yellows and blues, really some neat stuff on there. So if you've ever gone to England and drooled over all their primulas, you've got a chance to get them. But you do have to have a spot that will, not a clay spot that when it rains is wet and stays wet for a couple weeks, but then in the middle of the summer is bone dry for 3 months. That's not a wet spot. They want a spot that either naturally stays damp or that you do something. If you have a pond and you kind of grade it back and get some soil that the water gets up there, that kind of thing. If you do that, they're pretty easy. Wet soils, full sun to some part shade. That's where they're really going to be happiest. And they'll grow. They'll really mingle well with other plants that like that. Carnivorous plants. They'll grow well with with juncus and with the irises that like damp soils. All those kind of plants really do well with this. Back here. All right. The next plant is this Pulmonaria longifolia Bertram Anderson. And as somebody pointed out, it's a much prettier plant than its name implies, whether its scientific name or the common name of lungwort. Lungworts are shade plants in the borage family. They often have this real striking silver speckling to the leaves. This one, Bertram Anderson, is especially nice, I think. It's got lots of that silver. I'm not as fond of the ones that are complete silver overlay to the leaf. They just look like they have powdery mildew to me, which lungworts are susceptible to, terribly susceptible to powdery mildew in some cases. They tend to be early spring flowering. Most of the pulmonarias, some of the different species, the flowering can stretch out if you get a bunch of different species over almost a month and a half. Longifolia does tend to be one of the earlier ones, although again it's a bit early this year, earlier than it would otherwise be. It comes up, and much like the related Virginia bluebells, if you're familiar with those, you start off with kind of pinkish buds, and then they open up to this really nice blue color, which there aren't a whole lot of things that we can grow that have that color in the garden. So really nice. I always think a great way to use this is planted in mass under a yellow flowering spring plant, like think Coralopsis that's flowering now, which if you're not familiar with, we'll see some as we go through go through Asian Valley. You really get that gold and that blue. I think I have grown a lot of lungwort. It's a plant that I really like. It's mostly evergreen, so it looks good all winter. You get that silver speckling or silver overlay to the leaves. You get the great spring flowers, very early spring, which is nice. A lot of them are susceptible to powdery mildew, like I mentioned, and some other problems. Bertram Anderson is, in my mind, the best. Bar none, it is the best lungwort for the Southeast. I've never grown one that outperforms it, that lives longer, that does better. I do think it's best right before it flowers. I like to go in and cut off the foliage, because sometimes it stays mostly evergreen, and that foliage can get a little ratty, and you don't really notice it. You think it looks pretty good. It's like a lot of things, like Liriope or Ophiopogon. You think it doesn't look too bad. It got through the winter okay, but then once the new foliage comes out, you realize that the old foliage is a little rattier than you thought. It's kind of like putting a new couch in with your old chairs. All of a sudden they start looking old and faded. So I do like to cut it back so you don't have so much of this kind of thing you know, with kind of yellowy brown stuff. We don't always get to that kind of level. But you can see it's fully open. It's got flower buds that are fully open. If you look carefully at it, it's still got a lot of buds that are still tight, that are just now emerging. So it's going to keep flowering for another couple of weeks at least. So it's a fairly long bloom period. Easy to grow, likes, you know, what most shade garden plants like. Ideally, it would have a moist, well-drained soil, kind of loose organic, but it's pretty tolerant. It doesn't like to be stuck in straight clay, but not much does. And it will make a pretty sizable clump over time. You can get a nice big clump over time.
And the plant by your foot?
The plant by my foot is Arum italicum, the Japanese arum. It's a bulb, comes up in the fall, the foliage emerges. It looks great all winter. It'll go dormant soon. It'll be going dormant as it gets warmer. So it's a great plant for interplanting with other things, other perennials, because it pops up as they're going dormant. It pops up, and then it goes dormant when they're coming up. So you can get twice as many plants in one spot. Gets a white kind of Jack in the Pulpit flower, pretty good size, be 8 inches tall or more, hanging up, and then a little spike close to the ground of bright orange berries on there. Really a nice plant. And once you have it and have it established pretty well, you'll always have it. It's not bad. It's just it's very, very, very long-lived, very tough plant. And once it starts forming seed, if you let them stay out there, it'll seed around a little bit, and it's nice. It'll pop up. We certainly didn't plant this here. It just popped up here.
Spell it again.
This one? A-R-U-M, Arum italicum. If you hear of aroids, this is where the name comes from. This is an aroid. It comes from arum.
How much shade does the pulmonaria require?
Pulmonaria really requires at least good afternoon shade. It does not want full sun. At least not down here. You can get away with it some other places, but in the southeast it bakes in full sun. Lunaria annua is a biennial plant. The name implies that it's an annua, but it's actually a biennial plant, which means it, from seed, it puts out vegetative growth the first year. It grows like this the first year, and then the second year it puts up a flower stalk and flowers and sets more seed and spreads around. In reality, a lot of biennial plants, if you don't let them go to seed, they'll come back year after year and become more perennial. Plants aren't quite as cut and dry as our little where we put them. So even plants that go to seed will often come back year after year. But even if they don't, it's okay, because it will seed around in the garden. Is quite nice. This particular form, Varigata, you can see it has kind of a white edge to the leaf. Some will have more than others. Often the youngest growth will have more, but these are all seedlings from our original plant. It has seeded around. It keeps that variegation on the edge of the leaf. It'll send up a stalk with really nice purple flowers on the top. It's in the Brassicaceae family, the same family as cauliflower and lettuce and things like that. So if you think about, if you know what those go to when they go to start flowering, what they look like, it's kind of a little cross-shaped flower. It's like that, except for these are purple instead of the yellow you get on most of the vegetables you grow. Its common name is money plant, and it gets that because the seeds on it are technically what's called a silique, which is it's a little round one in this case, and kind of a translucent membrane looking thing, and it'll open up on both sides. Think of how a bean opens up down one side. This opens up all the way around, and so there are seeds. There's a central membrane and two closing membranes, like a sandwich with seeds on either side. Just another form of seed pod. But they hang on the top, and you get these really neat little translucent. They start off kind of light green and go to tan buff color on the top of that, and it looks like coins if you've got imagination. So that's why it's called money plant. You can cut those off and keep it from seeding around your garden. Often it'll like I said, it'll keep coming back, or you can just let them go and let it seed where they will, or you can collect it and sow it in pots and plant them where you want them. There are some gardens in England that do that with a lot of these plants. They collect the seed, they grow them in pots or in the ground, and they dig them and they move them and make it look like they naturally form this wonderful drift in amongst other things. Seems like a lot of work. I'd let the seeds just scatter where they will. But nature's a better designer than I am usually. So, very easy plants. They are best in some shade. They'll grow in full sun. The problem with sun is they will just wilt like nobody's business when the sun is shining directly on them. And you can actually see that a couple of plants where the sun shines on them, they're already wilting. And soil's pretty moist and it isn't that hot. So you get a lot of that, but they'll perk back up the next day. They just look kind of ragged. They don't look very good in the garden time. So best in a little bit of shade and great for just popping up around hellebores and other things in the shade. Questions?
They're very good for dry flowering.
Very good. Yes, yeah. You cut the seed stalks off with the seeds still on there, and they're great in dry flower arrangements. They are. Other thoughts? Comments? All right. As you go by on the right side, those of you in the back on the right side, there's a little Iphion uniflora sign. There are some plants by that, and then over here in amongst the hellebores, there are some more plants. So if you couldn't see it when I was pointing it out, it's this arrow-shaped leaf with kind of a white edge, a white wash to the edge of the leaf. All right, where are we up to next? Okay, we're gonna go for a long walk. So in case you get lost, we're gonna go down here. We're gonna go through the white garden that's to the left, the one with the paver path, and then we're gonna go cut through the Japanese garden, and we're gonna stop at the back side of the Japanese garden. And Chris at the beginning mentioned that our symposium, we're going to have one of our plant breeders from NC State giving a talk, Tom Ranney. As we go through the Japanese garden, there'll be a little flowering quince on the side. It's called Scarlet Storm. It's in full flower now. It's a young plant. We planted a little 3-inch pot about a year ago. It's still just got 1 or 2 stalks. It's a young thing. It's got flowers that are about 3.5 inches across, and it's a thornless flowering quince with kind of semi-double flowers. It's incredible. This is the first year that it's really done its thing, and we're pretty excited about it. So when you walk by, make sure you look at that and then register for the symposium.
He mentioned it. One of our breeders did.
As you go by, it's this little plant on the other side of the rock. Should not have done that to y'all. Should have known we'd have a big group talking about perennials. But I want to talk about this plant. It's an Acerum, one of the wild gingers, and we have, as you go through, you can see several of the wild gingers around here. But this one's the one that's tucked right up next to this kind of orangey rock here. Acerum Cumangianum. This is a wild ginger that is from kind of some of the southern islands of Japan. Yakushima is the main one where it grows, and nothing bad comes from Yakushima. Every garden plant from Yakushima seems to be just a wonderful, wonderful plant. And there are a lot of Acerums out there, zillions of them, most kind of indistinguishable from the others. And there are some that are similar to Acerum Cumangianum, but the one that's you most typically see in cultivation here is one with glossy leaves, and all Acerum Cumangianum have those glossy leaves, but then kind of a dark green with a pattern of light green on it. There are some that are just plain dark green. There are some that have some lighter veining to them on the dark green. Some with more of that that light green or more of a silvery overlay to them. But what's really nice about them, other than the foliage, which is so nice, they clump up really well. So you pay a fair amount of money for a plant with 2 little leaves in a pot, and a lot of these Acerums, you plant it, and 2 years later you have a nice little plant with 2 leaves in the garden. The Cumangianum does bulk up. It gets to be a pretty good sized plant. It's not a ground covering plant like some Acerums. It stays as a clump, but gets to be a pretty nice size. Like a lot of evergreen plants, when the leaves start getting a little ratty, evergreen perennials anyway, if the leaves start getting a little ratty, you can cut them back. I usually don't cut it all the way back because usually most of the leaves look good for a couple of years. if you like looking at the flowers, you can kind of pull the leaves apart and peek down in there, and it'll have pretty good sized flowers for an Asarum, often up close to an inch, kind of purple and green, real rough textured flowers right at ground level. If you really want to smell them, you can get down on your hands and knees and stick your nose in there, but be warned, anything that flowers with kind of a burgundy and white flower laying on the ground is attracting carrion insects that come to carrion, so the fragrance is not wonderful. Has a fragrance, just not a nice one. But these are kind of classic plants for the shade garden, and they grow in the United States. We have Asarum canadensis, a deciduous Asarum, kind of spreading ground covering type plant here. We have them on the West Coast, have them in all over Asia. They have zillions of them in Asia, it seems like. Questions about Asarum cumangianum or other wild gingers? Yes. Is there a question back there? Oh, somebody
Is
pointed.
it mostly moist or?
The question is it mostly moist? Yeah, it prefers that classic moist, well-drained woodland soil. They will be at their best in a regularly moist soil. It doesn't need to be really moist. They don't like it to be bone dry. But once it's established, this is one of the tougher ones of these Asarums. Yeah, I've seen it where it looks just completely limp, prostrate. Every leaf is just as limp as can be laying on the ground, and then perk back up with some water. All right. I don't often get this lucky, but somebody asked me if I would talk about epimediums, and the next plant on our list is an epimedium. So we're going to go down and look at it, and I'm going to go down one path. You can go down kind of the parallel path to me above it, and you'll be able to see the plant on both sides. So we'll go down that way and talk about that Asarum and other Asarums. Yeah. Okay, the next plant here is an Epimedium. This is Epimedium grandiflorum purple pixie, and I'll talk specifically about this one first, and then about other ones. This was one that was found as a seedling of Epimedium grandiflorum, which typically has white flowers or pink flushed white flowers. It was found by Dr. Dick Leidy, who ran the Mount Cuba Center for the Study of Piedmont Plants up in Delaware. So he dealt mostly with native plants, but he was a real plantsman. And for him to pick out an Epimedium means it has to be pretty good. Epimediums, they'll pop up. I'm not going to take off one of the big flower stalks here. It will come up, but Epimediums have real interesting flowers. Believe it or not, these are in the same family as barberries. And if you look at the flower closely, there is some similarity, but Epimediums have these long spurs. So you get a flower where the flower petals have a long spur that sticks out, and then it'll have sepals on the back. Sometimes they're the same color. The white ones, you have white spurs and white sepals on there. Some of them have short spurs, have long spurs. This is one of these really nice bicolor that have kind of white spurs and then this purple the purple sepal, so you get a great bicolor. They flower early. Epimediums then have leaves which come up from the ground typically. This is one leaf. This is not a bunch of different leaves. This is this whole thing is one leaf, and it splits in threes where it splits typically. There's some where they're a little more single, some oddball ones. Then you get these leaflets that are serrate. They often, when they emerge, they're kind of burgundy colored. Sometimes they're green splotched with burgundy, and then they'll turn nice green. Usually when you see them sold, you'll see them separated out as evergreen and deciduous. There's a little bit of a misname to that. There are deciduous ones, and then there are ones that should go deciduous but don't. Their foliage looks ratty by the end of the winter. Before the flowers emerge, go through and cut any of those evergreen ones back, because once the flowers come back up, if you want to get rid of your old ratty leaves, you'll be in there with little thin snips trying to get them out, because it's very difficult. So you want to cut it back, let the new stuff come up, because they really look ratty by the end of the winter. In my head, I kind of separate them out into, the two groups I separate them out into are true clumping ones that will stay tight clumps, and spreading ones. You can see this is a little bit more of a spreading one, although these are individual plants that were planted, so it's grandiflorum isn't a quick spreading one, but it's kind of in between a clumper and a spreader. Some will spread pretty quickly. Some of the classic ones are Epimedium versicolor and Sulphurium. Those spread pretty quickly. Others will stay much tighter clump. I planted at Norfolk Botanic Garden. We put in a collection of these, and I planted 150 of them, 150 different varieties and species. There's a lot out there. There's probably about another 150 at this point. A lot of breeding going on there, and people who really love Epimediums will try and plant all of them. 80% of them look the same or just aren't that good, so you got to stick to some of the better ones, like Purple Pixie. The other way, you know, there's people who like, you know, there's two kinds of people who think there's two kinds of things and others who don't. If you want to split these up another way, and again, and this is how I kind of think of things, you can have ones with these flower stalks with bunches of flowers, dozens and dozens of flowers that are very small and airy. You know, so you get this kind of this flower stalk with just loads of flowers on above the plant that are real fine and airy. Or you get ones with fewer flowers per stalk like this, but much bigger. And the different species kind of lead into that. Epimediums are one of those plants that are touted as great plants for dry shade. You know, everybody has dry shade because you have trees, and you know you can't get anything to grow there. Epimediums are a plant that will do that once established. Like everything else, you need to get them established first. But after that, they tend to be very drought-tolerant plants. They do want shade. They'll burn in the sun. There's a lot of different leaflet forms. There's some with great big long leaflets, 8 inches, 10 inches long, very leathery. Some that are light green, some that are real small and dainty. There are a bunch that will come out, and instead of the whole leaflet being plumb when it emerges, it'll just have a red ring around the outside of the leaf. You know, that only lasts for a couple of weeks, but it adds another dimension to the plant. So there are a lot of great Epimediums out there. Good one, if you have a lot of shade, it's very different texture in the garden. And the different plants, heights are different. Grandiflorum is a pretty low one, but there are some that will grow foliage, you know, 24 inches tall, and the flower spikes above that quite a bit. Those tend to be the expensive ones, though. So you can spend quite a lot of money on Epimediums if you want. Just like you can with Acerums and hellebores and all these plants. Vicaria verna copperknob. I'll talk about just Vicaria verna first a little bit, and then we'll talk about this specific one. If you want to buy one of these, you will not find it as Vicaria verna. You will find it as Ranunculus Vicaria. Has been separated out from Ranunculus and put into its own genus, Vicaria. These are little bulbous plants that have kind of rounded to heart-shaped leaves that come up from a central crown. Typically, they're nice. I call it spring green, just a real nice bright green. This particular one has burgundy on it. You see one at the corner of the bed over there with the gold flowers. That's the more typical look. All the way down by where that fritillaria was. That plant with the little low to the ground with yellow flowers. Look like some people have trouble with finding them. They come up often midwinter. You get the foliage up. They'll flower late winter into spring, then they'll go dormant and disappear. By late spring, they're gone. Typically, they're often confused with our native marsh marigold, Caltha palustris. They are different plants, and if you put them side by side, they're pretty different. Caltha palustris, similar leaves but longer petioles and bigger leaves. Flowers on longer flower stalks. Sometimes the flower stalks are branched on Caltha palustris. Real easy to grow. They can seed around, especially the straight species, which has single gold flowers on there. They can seed around, and in moist spots, they can really go crazy, go all over the place, to the point where some people consider them weeds. I think they're beautiful weeds, and they go dormant so early that you can plant anything else with them. This particular one called Copper Knob has the purple leaves, and there are quite a few with purple leaves. The first one that really garnered a lot of attention was one called Brazen Hussy. Shows you the value of a good name. If I'm sitting there looking at a couple of plants and I can get Brazen Hussy or Copper Knob, let's face it, I'm going with Brazen Hussy. This is one, as the flowers age, they get more coppery. When they emerge, they're really almost white with a gold center. But then as they age, or as the night falls and they start to close up, you get more of that coppery color that it was named for, kind of a coppery orangey yellow color, which is really nice. And if you look close, you can see some older flowers kind of tucked in there that have that. Simple plant. You plant them, water them a little bit. You think they died because they go dormant so quickly, especially newly planted ones. And the next year they pop up and they look great. And every year they just get a little bit bigger and bigger and bigger. Once they get to be a pretty good size, you can start dividing them if you want to spread them around. Often you'll see little ones popping up around. If you have these like a dark leaf form like this, the seedlings will often have dark leaves. Usually they'll go back to just a gold flower. The one we have at the corner over there with the more gold flowers and the green leaves, that's a double flowered one, and there are a lot of double flowered ones. If you really don't want them seeding around, the double flowered ones are better because those extra petals are usually the reproductive parts turned into petals. So instead of it making stamens on there, you get extra petals. So you don't get seeds on those very often. Questions about these? All right, you can go to specialty nursery, mail order places, and they'll have dozens and dozens and dozens of these. Most of them look the same. Huh? Plant Delights has a bunch, but man, you can go to some, especially in England, that just hundreds and hundreds of them. You look at the pictures and they all look the same. All right, well, thank you all for being here. If you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you, Mark.
Very good. Thank you.
Could not have picked a better day.
Turned out nice.